The Magician's Nephew, Chapters 13 and 14. Chapter 13. An Unexpected Meeting. "Wake up, Diggory! Wake up, Fledge!" came the voice of Polly. "It has turned into a toffee tree, and it's the loveliest morning." The low early sunshine was streaming through the wood, and the grass was gray with dew, and the cobwebs were like silver. Just beside them was a little, very dark wooded tree about the size of an apple tree. The leaves were whitish and rather papery, like the herb called honesty, and it was loaded with little brown fruits that looked rather like dates. "Hurrah!" said Diggory, "but I'm going to have a dip first." He rushed through the flowering thicket or two down to the river's edge. Have you ever bathed in a mountain river that is running in shallow cataracts over blue and red and yellow stones with the sun on it? It is as good as the sea, in some ways almost better. Of course he had to dress again without drying, but it was well worth it. When he came back, Polly went down and had her bath. At least, she said that's what she was doing, but we know she was not much of a swimmer, and perhaps it was best not to ask too many questions. Fledge visited the river too, but he only stood in midstream, stooping down for a long drink of water and then shaking his mane and neighing several times. Polly and Diggory got to work on the toffee tree. The fruit was delicious. Not exactly like toffee, softer for one thing and juicy, but like fruit which reminded one of toffee. Fledge also made an excellent breakfast. He tried one of the toffee fruits and liked it, but said he felt more like grass at that hour in the morning. Then with some difficulty the children got on his back and the second journey began. It was even better than yesterday, partly because everyone was feeling so fresh, and partly because the newly risen sun was at their backs, and of course everything looks nicer when the light is behind you. It was a wonderful ride. The big snowy mountains rose above them in every direction. The valleys far beneath them were so green, and all the streams which tumbled down from the glaciers into the main river were so blue that it was like flying over gigantic pieces of jewelry. They would have liked this part of the adventure to go on longer than it did, but quite soon they were all sniffing the air and saying, "What is it?" and "Did you smell something?" and "Where is it coming from?" For a heavenly smell, warm and golden, as if from all the most delicious fruits and flowers of the world, was coming up to them from somewhere ahead. Please stop here and answer question 1. "It's coming from that valley with the lake in it," said Fledge. "So it is," said Diggory, "and look, there's a green hill at the far end of the lake, and look how blue the water is." "It must be the place," said all three. Fledge came lower and lower in wide circles. The icy peaks rose up higher and higher above. The air came up warmer and sweeter every moment, so sweet that it almost brought tears to your eyes. Fledge was now gliding with his great wings spread out motionless on each side and his hoofs pawing for the ground. The steep green hill was rushing toward them. A moment later he alighted on its slope a little awkwardly. The children rolled off, fell without hurting themselves on the warm fine grass, and stood up panting a little. They were about 3/4 of the way up the hill, and set out at once to climb to the top. I don't think Fledge would have managed this without his wings to balance him, and to give him a little help of a flutter now and then. All round the very top of the hill ran a high wall of green turf. Inside the wall trees were growing. Their branches hung out over the wall. Their leaves showed not only green but also blue and silver when the wind stirred them. When the travelers reached the top, they walked nearly all the way around it, outside the green walls, before they found the gates, high gates of gold, fast shut, facing due east. Up till now, I think Fledge and Polly had had the idea that they would go in with Diggory, but they thought so no longer. You never saw a place which was so obviously private. You could see at a glance that it belonged to someone else. Only a fool would dream of going in unless he had been sent there on a very special business. Diggory himself understood at once that the others wouldn't and couldn't come in with him. He went forward to the gates alone. When he had come up close to them he saw words written on the gold with silver letters, something like this: "Come in by the gold gates, or not at all. Take of my fruit for others, or forbear. For those who steal and those who climb my wall shall find their heart's desire and find despair." "Take of my fruit for others," said Diggory to himself. "Well, that's what I'm going to do. It means I mustn't eat any myself, I suppose." I don't know what all that jaw in the last line is about. Come in by the gold gates? Well, who'd want to climb a wall if he could get in by a gate? But how do the gates open? He laid his hand on them, and instantly they swung apart, opening inward, turning on their hinges without the least noise. Please stop here and answer question 2. Now that he could see into the place, it looked more private than ever. He went in very solemnly, looking about him. Everything was very quiet inside. Even the fountain, which rose near the middle of the garden, made only the faintest sound. The lovely smell was all around him. It was a happy place, but very serious. He knew which was the right tree at once, partly because it stood in the very center, and partly because the great silver apples with which it was loaded shone so and cast a light of their own down on the shadowy places where the sunlight did not reach. He walked straight across to it, picked an apple, and put it in the breast pocket of his Norfolk jacket. But he couldn't help looking at it and smelling it before he put it away. It would have been better if he had not. A terrible thirst and hunger came over him, and a longing to taste that fruit. He put it hastily in his pocket, but there were plenty of others. Could it be wrong to taste one? After all, he thought, the notice on the gate might not have been exactly in order. It might have been only a piece of advice, and who cares about advice? Or even if it were in order, would he be disobeying it by eating an apple? He had already obeyed the part about taking one for others. While he was thinking of all this, he happened to look up through the branches toward the top of the tree. There, on a branch above his head, a wonderful bird was roosting. I say roosting because it seemed almost asleep, perhaps not quite. The tiniest slit of one eye was open. It was larger than an eagle, its breast saffron, its head crusted with scarlet, and its tail purple. And it just shows, said Diggory afterward, when he was telling the story to the others, that you can't be too careful in these magical places. You never know what may be watching you. But I think Diggory would not have taken an apple for himself in any case. Things like do not steal were, I think, hammered into boys' heads a good deal harder in those days than they are now. Still, we can never be certain. Please stop here and answer question 3. Diggory was just turning to go back to the gates when he stopped to have one last look around. He got a terrible shock. He was not alone. There, only a few yards away from him, stood the witch. She was just throwing away the core of an apple which she had eaten. The juice was darker than you would expect, and had made a hard stain around her mouth. Diggory guessed at once that she must have climbed in over the wall, and he began to see that there might be some sense in that last line about getting your heart's desire and getting despair along with it. For the witch looked stronger and prouder than ever, and even in a way triumphant, but her face was deadly white, white as salt. All this flashed through Diggory's mind in a second. Then he took to his heels and ran for the gates as hard as he could pelt, the witch after him. As soon as he was out, the gates closed behind him of their own accord. That gave him the lead, but not for long. By the time he had reached the others and was shouting out, "Quick, get on, Polly, get up, Fledge!" the witch had climbed over the wall, or vaulted over it, and was close behind him again. "Stay where you are," cried Diggory, turning round to face her, "or we'll all vanish. Don't come an inch nearer." "Foolish boy," said the witch, "why do you run from me? I mean you no harm. If you do not stop and listen to me now, you will miss some knowledge that would have made you happy all your life." "Well, I don't want to hear it, thanks," said Diggory, but he did. "I know what errand you have come on," continued the witch, "for it was I who was close beside you in the woods last night and heard all your counsels. You have plucked fruit in the garden yonder. You have it in your pocket now, and you are going to carry it back untasted to the lion, for him to eat, for him to use. You simpleton! Do you know what that fruit is? I will tell you. It is the apple of youth, the apple of life. I know, for I have tasted it, and I feel already such changes in myself that I know I shall never grow old or die. Eat it, boy, eat it, and you and I will both live forever and be king and queen of this world or of your world if we decide to go back there." "No, thanks," said Diggory. "I don't know that I care much about living on and on after everyone I know is dead. I'd rather live an ordinary time and die and go to heaven." "But what about this mother of yours, whom you pretend to love so?" "What's she got to do with it?" said Diggory. "Do you not see, fool, that one bite of that apple would heal her? You have it in your pocket. We are here by ourselves, and the lion is far away. Use your magic and go back to your own world. A minute later you can be at your mother's bedside giving her the fruit. 5 minutes later you will see the color coming back to her face. She will tell you the pain is gone. Soon she will tell you she feels stronger. Then she will fall asleep. Think of that. Hours of sweet, natural sleep without pain, without drugs. Next day everyone will be saying how wonderfully she has recovered. Soon she will be quite well again. All will be well again. Your home will be happy again. You will be like other boys." "Oh!" gasped Diggory, as if he had been hurt, and put his hand to his head, for now he knew that the most terrible choice lay before him. "What has the lion ever done for you that you should be his slave?" said the witch. "What can he do to you once you are back in your own world? And what would your mother think if she knew that you could have given her pain, taken her pain away and given her back her life, and saved your father's heart from being broken, and that you wouldn't? You would rather run messages for a wild animal in a strange world that is no business of yours." I I don't think he is a wild animal," said Diggory in a dried-up sort of voice. "He is... I don't know." "Then he is something worse," said the witch. "Look what he has done to you already. Look how heartless he has made you. That is what he does to everyone who listens to him. Cruel, pitiless boy. You would let your own mother die rather than—" "Oh, shut up!" said the miserable Diggory, still in the same voice. "Do you think I don't see? But I promised." "Ah, but you didn't know what you were promising, and no one here can prevent you." "Mother herself," said Diggory, getting the words out with difficulty, "wouldn't like it. Awfully strict about keeping promises, and not stealing, and all that sort of thing. She'd tell me not to do it, quick as anything, if she was here." "But she need never know," said the witch, speaking more sweetly than you would have thought anyone with so fierce a face could speak. "You wouldn't tell her how you got the apple. Your father need never know. No one in your world need know anything about this whole story. You needn't take the little girl back with you, you know." That was where the witch made her fatal mistake. Of course Diggory knew that Polly could get away by her own ring as easily as he could get away by his. But apparently the witch didn't know this. And the meanness of the suggestion that he should leave Polly behind suddenly made all the other things the witch had been saying to him sound false and hollow. And even in the midst of all his misery, his head suddenly cleared, and he said in a different and much louder voice, "Look here, where do you come into all of this? Why are you so precious fond of my mother all of a sudden? What's it got to do with you? What's your game?" "Good for you, Diggs," whispered Polly in his ear. "Quick, get away now." She hadn't dared to say anything all through the argument, because, you see, it wasn't her mother who was dying. "Up, then," said Diggory, heaving her on to Fledge's back, and then scrambling up as quickly as he could. The horse spread its wings. Please stop here and answer question 4. "Go then, fools," called the witch. "Think of me, boy, when you lie old and weak and dying, and remember how you threw away the chance of endless youth. It won't be offered you again." They were already so high that they could only just hear her, nor did the witch waste any time gazing up at them. They saw her set off northward down the slope of the hill. They had started early that morning, and what happened in the garden had not taken very long, so that Fledge and Polly both said that they could easily get back to Narnia before nightfall. Diggory never spoke on the way back, and the others were shy of speaking to him. He was very sad, and he wasn't even sure all that time that he had done the right thing. But whenever he remembered the shining tears in Aslan's eyes, he became sure. All day Fledge flew steadily with untiring wings, eastward with the river to guide him, through the mountains and over the wild wooded hills, and then over the great waterfall and down, to where the woods of Narnia were darkened by the shadow of the mighty cliff, till at last, when the sky was growing red with sunset behind him, he saw a place where many creatures were gathered, together by the riverside, and soon he could see Aslan himself in the midst of them. Fledge gilded down, spread out his 4 legs, closed his wings, and landed cantering. Then he pulled up. The children dismounted. Diggory saw all the animals, dwarfs, satyrs, nymphs, and the other things, drawing back to the left and right to make way for him. He walked up to Aslan, handed him the apple, and said, "I brought you the apple you wanted, sir." Please stop here and answer question 5. Chapter 14. The Planting of the Tree. "Well done," said Aslan in a voice that made the earth shake. Then Diggory knew that all the Narnians had heard these words, and that the story of them would be handed down from father to son in that new world for hundreds of years and perhaps forever. But he was in no danger of feeling conceited, for he didn't think about it at all now that he was face to face with Aslan. This time he found he could look straight into the lion's eyes. He had forgotten his troubles and felt absolutely content. "Well done, son of Adam," said the lion again. "For this fruit you have hungered and thirsted and wept. No hand but yours shall sow the seed of the tree that is to be the protection of Narnia. Throw the apple toward the river bank, where the ground is soft." Diggory did as he was told. Everyone had grown so quiet that you could hear the soft thump where it fell into the mud. "It is well thrown," said Aslan. "Let us now proceed to the coronation of King Frank of Narnia and Helen his queen." The children now noticed these two for the first time. They were dressed in strange and beautiful clothes, and from their shoulders rich robes flowed out behind them, to where 4 dwarves held up the king's train and 4 river nymphs held the queen's. Their heads were bare, but Helen had her hair down, and it made a great improvement in her appearance. It was neither hair nor clothes that made them look so different from their old selves. Their faces had a new expression, especially the king's. All the sharpness and cunning and quarrelsomeness which he had picked up as a London cabby seemed to have been washed away, and the courage and kindness which he had always had were easier to see. Perhaps it was the air of the young world that had done it, or talking with Aslan, or both. "Upon my word," whispered Fletch to Polly, "my old master's been changed nearly as much as I have. Why, he's a real master now." "Yes, but don't buzz in my ear like that," said Polly. "It tickles so." "Now," said Aslan, "some of you undo that tangle you have made with those trees, and let us see what we shall find there." Diggory now saw that where 4 trees grew close together, their branches had all been laced together or tied together with switches so as to make a sort of cage. The 2 elephants with their trunks and a few dwarfs with their little axes soon got it all undone. There were 3 things inside. One was a young tree that seemed to be made of gold. The second was a young tree that seemed to be made of silver, but the third was a miserable object in muddy clothes sitting haunched up between them. "Gosh!" whispered Diggory. "Uncle Andrew!" To explain all this we must go back a bit. The beasts, you remember, had tried planting and watering him. When the watering brought him to his senses, he found himself soaking wet, buried up to his thigh in earth, which was turning quickly into mud, and surrounded by more wild animals than he had ever dreamed of in his life before. It is perhaps not surprising that he began to scream and howl. This was, in a way, a good thing, for it at last persuaded everyone, even the warthog, that he was alive. So they dug him up again. His trousers were in a really shocking state by now. As soon as his legs were free, he tried to bolt, but one swift curl of the elephant's trunk round his waist soon put an end to that. Everyone now thought he must be safely kept somewhere, till Aslan had time to come and see him, and say what should be done about him. So they made a sort of cage or coop all around him. Then they offered him everything they could think of to eat. The donkey collected great piles of thistles and threw them in, but Uncle Andrew didn't seem to care about them. The squirrels bombarded him with volleys of nuts, but he only covered his head with his hands and tried to keep out of the way. Several birds flew to and fro, diligently dropping worms on him. The bear was especially kind. During the afternoon he found a wild bee's nest, and instead of eating himself, which he would very much have liked to have done, this worthy creature brought it back to Uncle Andrew. But this was in fact the worst failure of all. The bear lobbed the whole sticky mess over the top of the enclosure, and unfortunately hit Uncle Andrew slap in the face. Not all the bees were dead. The bear, who would not at all have minded being hit in the face by a honeycomb himself, could not understand why Uncle Andrew staggered back, slipped, and sat down. It was sheer bad luck that he sat down on a pile of thistles. And, anyway, as the warthog said, quite a lot of honey has got into the creature's mouth, and that's bound to have done it some good. They were really getting quite fond of their strange pet, and hoped that Aslan would allow them to keep it. The cleverer ones were quite sure by now that at least some of the noises which came out of his mouth had a meaning. They christened him Brandy, because he made that noise so often. Please stop here and answer question 6. In the end, however, they had to leave him there for the night. Aslan was busy all that day, instructing the new king and queen and doing other important things, and could not attend to poor old Brandy. What with the nuts, pears, apples, and bananas that had been thrown into him, he did fairly well for supper, but it wouldn't be true to say that he passed an agreeable night. "Bring out that creature," said Aslan. One of the elephants lifted Uncle Andrew in its trunk and laid him at the lion's feet. He was too frightened to move. "Please, Aslan," said Polly, "could you say something to unfrighten him? And then could you say something to prevent him from ever coming back here again?" "Do you think he wants to?" said Aslan. "Well, Aslan," said Polly, "he might send someone else. He's so excited about the bar off the lamppost growing into a lamppost tree, and he thinks—" "He thinks a great folly, child," said Aslan. This world is bursting with life for these few days because the song in which I called it into life still hangs in the air and rumbles in the ground. It will not be so for long. But I cannot tell that to this old sinner, and I cannot comfort him either. He has made himself unable to hear my voice. If I spoke to him, he would hear only growlings and roarings. Oh, Adam's sons, how cleverly you defend yourself against all that might do you good. But I will give him the only gift he is still able to receive." He bowed his great head rather sadly and breathed into the magician's terrified face. "Sleep," he said. "Sleep and be separated for some few hours from all the torments you have devised for yourself." Uncle Andrew immediately rolled over with closed eyes and began breathing peacefully. Please stop here and answer question 7. "Carry him aside and lay him down," said Aslan. "Now, dwarfs, show your smithcraft. Let me see you make 2 crowns for your king and queen." More dwarfs than you could dream of rushed toward to the golden tree. They had all its leaves stripped off and some of its branches torn off too, before you could say Jack Robinson. And now the children could see that it did not merely look golden, but was of real soft gold. It of course had sprung up from the half sovereigns which had fallen out of Uncle Andrew's pocket when he turned upside down, just as the silver had grown up from the half crowns. From nowhere, as it seemed, piles of dry brushwood for fuel, a little anvil, hammers, tongs, and bellows were produced. Next moment, how those dwarfs loved their work! The fire was blazing, the bellows were roaring, the gold was melting, the hammers were clinking. 2 moles, whom Aslan had set to digging, which was what they liked best, earlier in the day, poured out a pile of precious stones at the dwarf's feet. Under the clever fingers of the little smiths 2 crowns took shape, not ugly heavy things like modern European crowns, but light, delicate, beautifully shaped circles that you could really wear and look nicer by wearing. The king's set was with rubies and the queen's with emeralds. When the crowns had been cooled in the river, Aslan made Frank and Helen kneel before him, and he placed the crowns on their heads. Then he said, "Rise up, King and Queen of Narnia, father and mother of many kings that shall be in Narnia and the Isles and the Archen land. Be just and merciful and brave. The blessing is upon you." Then everyone cheered, or brayed, or neighed, or trumpeted, or clapped its wings, and the royal pair stood looking solemn and a little shy, but all the nobler for their shyness. And while Diggory was still cheering, he heard the deep voice of Aslan beside him saying, "Look!" Everyone in the crowd turned its head, and then everyone drew a long breath of wonder and delight. A little way off, towering over their heads, they saw a tree which had certainly not been there before. It must have grown up silently, yet swiftly, as a flag rises when you pull up on a flagstaff, while they were all busied around the coronation. Its spreading branches seemed to cast a light rather than a shade, and silver apples peeped out like stars from under every leaf. But it was the smell from which came it, even more than the sight, that made everyone draw in their breath. For a moment one could hardly think about anything else. "Son of Adam," said Aslan, "you have sown well. And you, Narnians, let it be your first care to guard this tree, for it is your shield. The witch of whom I told you has fled far away into the north of the world. She will live on there, growing stronger in dark magic. But while that tree flourishes, she will never come down into Narnia. She dare not come within 100 miles of the tree, for its smell, which is joy and life and health to you, is death and horror and despair to her." Please stop here and answer question 8. Everyone was staring solemnly at the tree when Aslan suddenly swung round his head, scattering gold gleams of light from his mane as he did so, and fixed his large eyes on the children. "What is it, children?" he said, and for he caught them in the very act of whispering and nudging one another. "Oh, Aslan, sir," said Diggory, turning red, "I forgot to tell you. The witch has already eaten one of those apples, one of the same kind that the tree grew from." He hadn't really said all he was thinking, but Polly at once said it for him. Diggory was always much more afraid than she of looking a fool. "So we thought, Aslan," she said, "that there must be some mistake, and she can't really mind the smell of those apples." "Why do you think that, daughter of Eve?" asked the lion. "Well, she ate one." "Child," he replied, "that is why all the rest are now a horror to her. That is what happens to those who pluck and eat fruits at the wrong time and in the wrong way. The fruit is good, but they loathe it ever after." "Oh, I see," said Polly. "And I suppose because she took it in the wrong way, it won't work for her. I mean, it won't make her always young and all that?" "Alas," said Aslan, shaking his head, "it will. Things always work according to their nature. She has won her heart's desire. She has unwearying strength, and endless days like a goddess. But length of days, with an evil heart, is only length of misery, and already she begins to know it. All get what they want. They do not always like it." "I nearly ate one myself, Aslan," said Diggory. "Would I—" "You would, child," said Aslan, "for the fruit always works. It must work. But it does not work happily for any who pluck it at their own will. If any Narnian, unbidden, had stolen an apple and planted it here to protect Narnia, it would have protected Narnia. But it would have done so by making Narnia into another strong and cruel empire like Charn, not the kindly land I meant it to be. And the witch tempted you to do another thing, my son, did she not?" Please stop here and answer question 10. "Yes, Aslan, she wanted me to take an apple home to mother." "Understand, then, that it would have healed her, but not to your joy or to hers. The day would have come when both of you and she would have looked back and said it would have been better to die in that illness." And Diggory could say nothing, for tears choked him, and he gave up all hopes of saving his mother's life. But at the same time he knew that the lion knew what would have happened, and that there might be things more terrible even than losing someone you loved by death. But now Aslan was speaking again, almost in a whisper. "That is what would have happened, child, with the stolen apple. It is not what will happen now. What I give you now will bring joy. It will not in your world give endless life, but it will heal. Go, pluck her an apple from the tree." For a second Diggory could hardly understand. It was as if the whole world had turned inside out and upside down. And then, like someone in a dream, he was walking across to the tree, and the king and queen were cheering him, and all the creatures were cheering too. He plucked the apple and put it in his pocket. Then he came back to Aslan. "Please," he said, "may we go home now?" He had forgotten to say thank you, but he meant it, and Aslan understood. Please stop here and answer question 10.